Christmas morning, 1858. Somewhere in the tobacco fields stretching across central North Carolina, a transaction took place that would end in flames before the sun set again. The records are incomplete, some say deliberately so. What we know is this. A child was sold. A mother watched, and by dawn on December 26th, one of the region's wealthiest estates was nothing but ash and bone. The official inquiry blamed faulty lanterns. But the people who lived through it, the survivors, they whispered a different story. A story about a woman named Ruth. A price paid in silver. And a fire so hot it melted the iron entrance gates. What really happened that Christmas night has been buried for over a century and a half, hidden in courthouse basements and family archives never meant to see daylight. Before we continue with the story of Ruth and the fire that consumed the Harrove estate, if you're fascinated by dark historical mysteries like this one, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. I'd also love to know, drop a comment below telling me what state or city you're listening from. Now, let's go back to North Carolina, 1858, and uncover what really happened. The winter of 1858 had been unusually mild across North Carolina's Piedmont region, where the Harrove estate sat on nearly 400 acres of prime tobacco land. The estate was one of the oldest in Randolph County, established in 1791 by Colonel William Harrove, a Revolutionary War veteran who'd been granted the land as payment for his service. The colonel was a practical man, not given to sentiment or grand gestures. He built his house with thick walls and small windows, designed to keep out summer heat and winter cold. He planted his first tobacco crop in the spring of 1792 using seeds brought from Virginia, and by harvest time that year, he'd turned a profit. By the time his grandson, Edmund Harrove, inherited the property in 1852, it had grown into a sprawling operation: 3 tobacco barns, a 12-room main house, a separate kitchen building, stables, a smokehouse, a blacksmith's forge, a carpenter's workshop, and quarters for the 43 enslaved people who worked the land. The estate produced nearly 20,000 pounds of tobacco annually, most shipped to Richmond and then on to European markets. Edmund Harrove was 34 years old when he took over. He'd studied law at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill but never practiced, returning home instead to manage the family business. He was known in the county as a businessman first, a planter second. He kept meticulous records. Every bushel of tobacco, every tool, every transaction went into leather-bound ledgers stored in a locked cabinet in his study. Those ledgers were his pride. He could tell you at any moment the estate's exact worth, down to the last dollar. He was married to a woman named Caroline, the daughter of a Charleston merchant family. She was 28, pale and thin, with a nervous disposition that worsened after the birth of their second son. She spent most of her time in the main house's upstairs rooms, reading novels and writing letters to her sisters in South Carolina. She rarely ventured outside, and when she did, she wore a wide-brimmed hat and gloves, even in winter. Their 2 sons, William and James, were 7 and 5 years old, respectively. They were looked after by an enslaved woman named Bess, who'd been with the family since before Edmund was born. Bess was in her 60s, gray-haired and stooped, but still sharp-minded. She'd raised Edmund and his 2 sisters, and now she was raising his sons. She slept in a small room off the kitchen, close enough to hear if the boys woke in the night. The estate was laid out in a grid, the main house at the center. To the east stretched the tobacco fields, nearly 200 acres. To the west were vegetable gardens, orchards, and livestock pens. To the north stood the barns and workshops, and to the south, separated from the main house by a wide dirt road, were the quarters, a row of 12 small cabins where the enslaved people lived. By all accounts, Edmund Harrove was unremarkable, not particularly cruel by the standards of the time, but not kind either. He didn't whip his workers himself, he left that to his overseer, a man named Cyrus Dalton. But he didn't intervene when Dalton did. He provided adequate food and clothing, but nothing more. He allowed small gardens behind the cabins and gave Christmas Day off. But he charged for any extra supplies. He ran his estate with cold efficiency and an eye always on profit. Ruth had been born on the Harrove estate in the spring of 1834. Her mother, Dinah, had been brought to the estate as a young woman in the 1820s, purchased from a trader in Fayetteville. Dinah worked in the main house as a cook, a position that carried status among the enslaved community. She was known for her skill with bread and pastries, and Caroline Harrove relied on her heavily, especially during her pregnancies. Ruth grew up in the main house, helping her mother in the kitchen. She learned to read by watching the Harrove children do their lessons, and she learned to cook by standing at her mother's elbow. She was a quiet child, observant, with her mother's dark eyes and quick hands. When Ruth was 11, Dinah fell ill with a sudden fever. Within 3 days, she was dead. The doctor said it was likely typhoid. She was buried in the small cemetery behind the quarters in an unmarked grave. After Dinah's death, Ruth was moved to the fields. She was too young for the tobacco rows, so she was assigned lighter tasks, carrying water, pulling weeds, gathering leaves. By 14, she was working full days, bent over the rows from dawn until dusk, her hands stained brown from tobacco sap. She was 17 when she met Samuel. Samuel had been born on a Virginia plantation and sold south when he was 15. He was purchased by Edmund Harrove in 1850 along with 3 other men to work in the tobacco barns. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet strength that made him well-liked. He noticed Ruth one Sunday afternoon in late summer, 1851. She was by the creek washing clothes. He said something, she looked up and smiled. They were married in the spring of 1852 in the way enslaved people married, no legal ceremony, no official record. But on a Sunday evening in April, they stood together in front of the others in the quarters, and an older man named Jacob, who'd been a preacher before he was sold, spoke a few words over them. Afterward, there was a small celebration. Someone had gotten hold of a chicken, there was cornbread and greens, and someone played a fiddle. Samuel moved into Ruth's cabin, a one-room structure with a dirt floor and a single window. They had a bed made from rough planks and a straw mattress, a table, 2 stools, and a fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Life settled into a rhythm. They worked the fields by day. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire and talk. Samuel would carve small things from wood, spoons, bowls, toys. Ruth would mend clothes or braid cloth into rugs. On Sundays, they'd walk to the creek and watch the sun set. Their daughter was born on a cold, rainy night in March 1857. Ruth went into labor in the afternoon. By midnight, the baby was born. Samuel stayed with her, holding her hand, wiping her forehead. When the baby came, small and red-faced and wailing, he wrapped her in a blanket and handed her to Ruth. Ruth looked down at the tiny face, the dark eyes blinking up, and felt something shift inside her chest, a fierce, protective love almost painful in its intensity. She named her Lily, after the wildflowers near the creek. Lily was a healthy baby, bright-eyed and quick to smile. She had Ruth's dark eyes and Samuel's broad forehead. By 6 months, she was laughing and reaching. By a year, she was pulling herself up to stand. Ruth carried her to the fields in a sling, setting her in the shade while she worked. In the evenings, she'd sing her old songs, songs Dinah had taught her, passed down through generations, songs about rivers and roads and freedom. Samuel doted on the child. He'd carve little wooden toys for her, a horse, a bird, a rabbit. He'd make them dance while Lily laughed and reached. He'd tell her stories in a soft voice about places he'd never been, places he'd only heard of, places where people were free. For a brief time, despite everything, there was something close to happiness in that small cabin. But Edmund Harrove's ledgers told a different story. The 1857 tobacco crop had been poor. A late frost damaged the seedlings, a dry summer stunted growth. The harvest brought in less than half of what Harrove had projected. By fall, he was in debt to a merchant in Greensboro who'd extended credit for seed and supplies. The merchant wanted payment. Harrove didn't have it. In November, a man named Josiah Trent arrived. Trent was a slave trader based in Richmond, traveling a circuit through the Carolinas, buying and selling human beings like livestock. He was in his 40s, a large man with a thick beard and cold eyes. He wore expensive clothes, a wool coat, leather boots, a gold watch chain, and carried himself with the confidence of a profitable business. He paid cash and didn't ask many questions. Harrove met with him in the study. The meeting lasted 2 hours. They negotiated. Trent wanted young field hands for plantations further south. Harrove was reluctant to sell his best workers, but he needed the money. They settled on 3 men in their 20s, strong and healthy. Trent would pay $800 each, but it wasn't enough. "You got any children?" Trent asked. "A few. Light-skinned." Trent smiled. Light-skinned children fetch a good price in Richmond, especially girls. People like to buy them young, raise them in the house. "I'll give you $200 for a healthy child. $250 if she's particularly light." Harrove looked down at his ledger. He ran his finger down the list until he found it. "Lily," he said. "Born March 1857. Daughter of Ruth and Samuel." Trent made a note. "I'll take her." When Trent left, he had a list of 4 names, 3 men and 1 child. Ruth's name wasn't on it, but Lily's was. Christmas Day 1858 began cold and gray, a thin fog over the fields. The enslaved people had the day off, as was customary. Some gathered in the quarters sharing food, others stayed in their cabins trying to keep warm. Ruth woke early. Lily was fussy, teething and feverish. She'd been up half the night. Ruth had held her close, rocking and singing. Samuel had gone to the main house before dawn. Harrove had called him to move furniture for a gathering that evening. He promised to be back by midday. Ruth sat by the fire, holding Lily. The baby was quieter now, eyes half closed, small fist around Ruth's finger. Ruth hummed softly, the same song her mother had sung. Around 10 a.m., a knock on the door. Ruth knew immediately something was wrong. No one knocked on Christmas morning. She stood slowly, holding Lily, and opened the door. It was Edmund Harrove, and behind him, Josiah Trent. Ruth's breath caught. She stepped back, pulling Lily closer. Harrove's face was expressionless. He didn't look at her directly. "The child's been sold," he said, his voice flat. "Trent's taking her to Richmond this afternoon." Ruth's hands tightened. "No," she whispered. Harrove finally looked at her. "It's done. The papers are signed." Ruth shook her head. "Please. She's just a baby. Not even 2. Trent stepped forward. "Make it easy on yourself. Hand her over." Ruth backed toward the wall. "Please don't do this." "She'll fetch a good price," Trent said. "Light-skinned children always do. Someone will raise her in a house. She'll have a better life. She's my daughter." Harrove's voice was cold. "She's my property. And I need the money." Ruth looked at him, really looked, at his expensive coat, polished boots, clean hands, the gold watch chain, the face showing no guilt. "You're selling my baby," she said, voice shaking. "On Christmas." Harrove didn't respond. What happened next was over in less than a minute. Trent moved quickly, crossing the cabin in 2 strides. He grabbed Lily from Ruth's arms with practiced efficiency. The baby screamed, a high, piercing wail. Ruth lunged, but Harrove caught her arm, twisting it behind her back, forcing her to her knees. Trent was already out the door, Lily wailing in his arms. Ruth screamed, a sound of pure anguish. She screamed until her voice broke, her throat raw. Harrove released her and stepped back. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing. He looked down at her. "You'll get over it," he said. Then he turned and walked out, closing the door. Ruth stayed on the floor, shaking. She could hear Lily crying, the sound growing fainter, the creak of a wagon, the jingle of harness, horses' hooves on frozen ground. Then silence. By noon, Josiah Trent's wagon was gone, heading north toward Virginia. Lily was in the back, wrapped in a blanket, still crying. The three men were chained in the wagon bed, faces blank with shock. Ruth didn't move for hours. When Samuel returned and found her, he didn't speak. He just knelt and held her while she cried. But eventually, the tears stopped, replaced by something cold and hard and unbreakable. That evening, as the sun set and the temperature dropped, Ruth stood. She walked out of the cabin, across the quarters, toward the main house. Samuel tried to follow, but she told him, "Don't follow me." Her voice was quiet, but it made him stop. She didn't go to the front door. She went to the kitchen building, connected to the main house by a covered walkway. The hearth fire was still burning, kept lit for morning cooking. Ruth stood there a long time, staring at the flames. She thought of Dinah, who'd worked in this kitchen for 20 years before she died. She thought of all the meals she'd cooked for people who saw her as a tool. She thought of Lily, her small hands, bright eyes, her laugh, the way she'd reached for Ruth that morning as Trent carried her away. And she thought of Edmund Harrove, his cold eyes, his ledgers, his gold watch chain, the way he'd said, "You'll get over it," as if losing a child was like losing a tool. She reached down and picked up a burning log from the hearth. The heat seared her hands, but she didn't let go. She carried it through the walkway into the main house. She went to the study first, the room where Harrove kept his ledgers, where he'd negotiated the price of her daughter's life. She set the burning log on the desk, on top of the open ledger. The paper caught immediately, flames spreading across the pages. She watched the names burn, all those people, reduced to entries. Then she turned and walked out. She went to the parlor, where Caroline Harrove kept her expensive furniture and imported rugs. She set fire to the curtains, watching them go up. Then the dining room, the sitting room, the hallway. By the time she reached the front door, the entire first floor was burning. She walked out into the cold night and stood in the yard, watching the flames spread. Shouting, people running, someone screaming. But she didn't move. She just stood, hands blistered and bleeding, watching the house burn. The fire burned for hours, consuming not just wood and brick, but the illusion of order men like Edmund Harrove tried to impose on a system built on human suffering. When the first neighbors arrived, drawn by the glow visible for miles, there was nothing to be done. The main house was engulfed, flames shooting 30 feet into the air. The heat was so intense no one could get within 50 yards. They formed a bucket line from the well anyway, a futile attempt. Edmund Harrove and his family had escaped through a second-floor window. Caroline jumped first, landing badly and breaking her ankle. The boys were lowered down by their father, caught by Bess, who'd been one of the first to see the flames. Harrove was last out, his nightshirt singed, face blackened with smoke. They huddled in the yard, wrapped in blankets, watching their home burn. William cried, James stared wide-eyed. Caroline was in shock, her ankle twisted, face pale. The enslaved people from the quarters came running. Some joined the bucket line, others tried to save what they could from the outbuildings. The kitchen caught fire around midnight and burned completely. A tobacco barn downwind caught sparks and was lost. By dawn on December 26th, the main house was a smoking ruin. Walls collapsed inward, only the brick chimney standing, blackened and cracked. The iron entrance gates had warped from the heat, their scrollwork melted and twisted. Ruth was found sitting on the ground near the remains. Her hands burned and blistered, dress singed and torn. She didn't resist when Overseer Cyrus Dalton grabbed her arm and pulled her up. She didn't say a word. Samuel tried to go to her, but Dalton shoved him back. Stay where you are." Ruth looked at Samuel once, just once. Her eyes were dry. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She looked at him, then away. Dalton took her to a barn and locked her inside. The inquiry began 2 days later. County Sheriff Thomas Garrett came with a deputy and a clerk. He interviewed Harrove first, then Caroline, then several enslaved people present when the fire started. Harrove's account was straightforward. He'd been asleep, woke to smoke and screams, got his family out. He believed it was a lantern left burning in the kitchen, or a spark from the hearth. But when pressed, he admitted Ruth had been seen near the kitchen shortly before the fire. "There was an incident earlier," he said finally. "A child was sold." The mother was upset. "Upset enough to set fire to your house?" the sheriff asked. Harrove didn't answer directly. "I don't know what she was thinking. But she was the last person seen near the kitchen." The sheriff interviewed Ruth the next day. She was still in the barn, hands wrapped in cloth strips Bess had brought. She sat on the dirt floor, back against the wall, staring at nothing. "Did you set the fire?" Garrett asked. Ruth didn't respond. "If you confess, it'll go easier. The judge might show leniency." Ruth looked at him. Her eyes were empty. "What will you do to me?" Her voice was hoarse from screaming. "That's up to the judge." "Will you hang me?" Garrett shifted uncomfortably. "That's up to the judge." Ruth looked away. "Then it doesn't matter what I say." The inquiry concluded 3 days later. The official finding was inconclusive, no direct evidence, only circumstantial suspicion. But there was no other explanation that made sense. Edmund Harrove didn't push for a trial. Some said he didn't want the attention, newspapers, questions, scrutiny. People asking why he'd sold a baby on Christmas. Others said he knew what a trial would reveal, that he'd sold a child for $200 in silver, torn a family apart to pay a debt, done it on Christmas. Whatever his reasons, he decided, Ruth would be sold quietly, quickly, far enough away that the story wouldn't follow. 3 weeks later, a broker from Charleston named Marcus Finch arrived. He specialized in difficult cases, enslaved people who'd run away or fought back. He paid less than market value but paid cash and didn't ask questions. He paid Harrove $150 for Ruth, $50 less than Harrove got for Lily. Ruth was taken away on a cold morning in late January. She didn't say goodbye to Samuel. She didn't look back at the quarters, the fields, the ruins. She just climbed into Finch's wagon and sat down, hands bandaged, face expressionless. Samuel watched her go. He stood outside their cabin, hands clenched, jaw tight. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He watched until the wagon disappeared. That night, he went into the cabin and found the small wooden rabbit he'd carved for Lily. He held it a long time, running fingers over the smooth wood, remembering her laugh. Then he wrapped it in cloth and buried it beneath the floorboards where her cradle had been. The years that followed were hard for the Harrove estate. Edmund Harrove rebuilt, but it took time and money he didn't have. He borrowed from banks, putting up the land as collateral. He hired new workers, but they were expensive, and tobacco crops remained unpredictable. By 1860, the estate was barely breaking even. He built a new house, smaller, simpler, functional. He rebuilt the kitchen farther away, with a stone foundation and tall brick chimney. He became obsessed with fire safety, locked doors, shuttered windows, water buckets, an emergency bell. He kept a rifle by his bed and slept poorly. Caroline never fully recovered. Her ankle healed badly, leaving a permanent limp. But the physical injury was nothing compared to her terror of fire. She refused candles, allowed only oil lamps in occupied rooms. She wouldn't let the boys near the hearth. She had nightmares, waking screaming that she smelled smoke. By 1861, she stopped leaving the house entirely, staying in her upstairs bedroom, reading the same books, writing unsent letters. She rarely spoke to Edmund, and only about locks or water buckets. The boys grew up in the fire's shadow. William became quiet and withdrawn, waking at night crying about flames. James developed a stutter he never outgrew. The enslaved people spoke of the fire in whispers. They told the story of Ruth and Lily, of Christmas morning, of Ruth walking into the house with a burning log. Some said she was right, Harrove deserved to lose his house, his wealth, his security. Others said it was a mistake, bringing more suffering. But everyone agreed, Ruth made a choice. If she couldn't have her daughter, Harrove wouldn't have his house. Samuel never spoke of Ruth after she was taken. He worked in the tobacco barns as before, but quieter. He didn't carve. He didn't sing. He kept to himself. In spring 1861, when the war started, several younger men tried to run to Union lines. 2 made it, 3 were caught. Samuel didn't try. He just kept working, face expressionless. In 1863, Overseer Cyrus Dalton was conscripted into the Confederate Army. He was killed at Gettysburg. Harrove tried to manage alone but was overwhelmed. Crops failed, workers became less cooperative. By 1865, the estate was in ruins, fields overgrown, barns falling apart, the new house already neglected. When emancipation came, Samuel was one of the first to leave. He walked off on a warm May morning, carrying only the clothes on his back and the wooden rabbit dug up from the cabin floor. He walked north toward Virginia. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't stay. He never found Lily. He asked everyone about a light-skinned girl, about 8 years old, sold in Richmond in 1858. But no one knew. Records were destroyed in the war, traders dead or scattered. The trail was cold. He settled in a small Virginia town, working as a carpenter. He never married again, never had other children. He kept the wooden rabbit on a shelf, sometimes holding it at night, remembering. He died in 1891 at 63, buried in an unmarked grave. Edmund Harrove held on until 1871. By then he was 47 but looked 20 years older, hair gray, hands shaking, a persistent cough the doctor said was from smoke inhalation the night of the fire. In spring 1871, he had a failure of the heart, collapsing in his study, found slumped over his desk, pen in hand. He was buried in the family plot. Caroline and the boys moved to Charleston. Caroline died in 1875. William became a shipping clerk, never married. James moved to Texas and disappeared. The estate changed hands, was subdivided and sold. By 1900, only the family cemetery and a few crumbling foundations remained. But the story didn't end. In 1923, a man named Robert Vance bought 50 acres of the old property, including the grove where the main house stood. Vance was a World War I veteran from Pennsylvania who'd moved south for cheap land. He cleared part of the grove and built a small house near the creek. He lived alone. The first year was fine. Then, summer 1924, things changed. He'd wake at night smelling smoke, acrid, like burning fabric or tar. He'd check, but nothing was burning. The smell would fade. He told himself it was his imagination, memories of the war. Then footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate pacing. He'd check, but no one. And sometimes, a woman's voice singing faintly, mournful, words distorted. He tried to ignore it. But it continued. In fall 1924, he dug a new well near where he thought the main house had stood. About 4 feet down, his shovel hit metal, a rusted iron box, locked. He broke the lock with a hammer. Inside were old, yellowed ledgers, records of enslaved people bought and sold. Page after page of names, ages, descriptions, prices. Then, near the bottom of one page, Lily, female, born March 12, 1857, light-skinned, sold December 25, 1858, $200. Beneath it, in different handwriting, pencil, he took my child. I took his house. We are even now. Vance stared. He didn't know the full story, but he understood. He gathered the ledgers, burned them in his fireplace, watching the names turn to ash. But it didn't help. The sounds, the smell continued. By spring 1925, he sold the property and moved back to Pennsylvania. He never spoke of it until 1954, when he was 73 in a veteran's home. He told a local newspaper reporter. "I don't believe in ghosts," Vance said. "But something was wrong with that land. I couldn't stay." The reporter asked about the ledgers. "Who would I tell?" Vance said. "What would it change? They're all dead. It's just history." But history doesn't always stay buried. In 1968, graduate student Margaret Colby, researching enslaved families, found a reference to the Hero fire, a few lines in an 1859 inquiry report, a fire on Christmas night, a woman suspected, a child sold that morning. She dug deeper, finding the inconclusive report, property records, tax documents. Then, misfiled in a courthouse basement, a letter dated January 15, 1859, to Edmund Hero from Reverend Thomas Whitley, a Methodist minister. "Mr. Hero, I write with a heavy heart. I have heard what transpired on Christmas Day, and what followed. The woman Ruth came to me before she was taken away. She did not confess, she did not deny. She said only, 'He took my child. I took his house. We are even now. I fear you are not even. I fear what you have sown, you will reap. I urge you to seek forgiveness and make amends. Your servant in Christ, Reverend Thomas Whitley." Colby included the letter in her thesis, Fractured Families, the Impact of Child Sales on Enslaved Communities in North Carolina, 1820-1865. It was never published. She left graduate school in 1970. A copy ended up in the NC State University Library archives. In 2003, historian Dr. Alan Pritchard, researching resistance, came across Colby's thesis. Struck by the letter, he investigated for 2 years, tracking down records, searching for descendants. He found no records of Ruth after she was sold, but he found descendants. One was Evelyn Morris, 91, in a Greensboro nursing home. "My great-great-grandmother was Dinah, Ruth's mother," Evelyn said. Before she died, she made Ruth promise never to let them break her, never let them take everything. When they took Lily, Ruth kept that promise. She took something back. Pritchard asked what happened to Ruth. "She died in South Carolina, before the war ended, I think. But she sent a message back, passed along through people, 'Tell Samuel I kept my promise.'" Pritchard published his findings in 2005, Resistance and Retribution, the Hero Estate Fire of 1858. It received academic attention. In 2017, documentary filmmaker Jessica Huang, researching untold resistance stories, found Pritchard's article. Fascinated, she made a documentary. She and Pritchard traveled to Randolph County, got permission from the current owner, Dale Hutchins, and brought archaeologists with ground-penetrating radar. They found the blackened foundation of the main house. Beneath it, a stone-lined pit hidden under the study floor. Inside were remnants of burned ledgers, and a small wooden carving of a rabbit. Jessica held it. "This is Samuel's carving. For Lily. But how did it get here? Samuel left after the war, he took it with him. They realized, Ruth must have had it. She buried it beneath the house, beneath the ledgers. She hadn't just acted in rage, she'd planned it. She burned the records to erase the transactions, and left the carving as a marker, a message." Dr. Pritchard later said, "Ruth knew she couldn't save Lily, couldn't undo what was done. But she could destroy Herove's documentation of human suffering. The carving was her way of saying, "This is for Lily. For all of us. You can't erase us. We were here. We mattered." Jessica Huang's documentary, The Fire That Ruth Set, premiered at Tribeca in 2018, winning Best Documentary Feature, later streamed to millions. It sparked debate: was Ruth a hero fighting an evil system, or a desperate woman making a terrible choice? Historians debated the evidence. But all agreed, Ruth made a choice. The land is quiet now. In 2019, the County Historical Society installed a granite marker with a bronze plaque, site of the Herove estate, established 1791, destroyed by fire December 25, 1858. A place of labor, loss, and resistance. In memory of Ruth, Lily, Samuel, and all those whose names were lost. Dale Hutchins allows respectful visitors. Some leave flowers, some leave small wooden carvings. The wooden rabbit is in the North Carolina Museum of History, displayed with ledger fragments and Whitley's letter. The exhibit, Resistance and Remembrance, the Herove Estate Fire. Ruth's grave is unknown. No records of her death have been found. She may have died during the war or survived with a new name. Lily's fate remains a mystery. Trent's records burned in a Richmond warehouse fire in 1862. She may have been a house servant in Richmond, resold further south, or died young unrecorded. Edmund Herove's grave is overgrown in the family plot. Descendants have mixed reactions. In 2020, a descendant, Patricia Herove Chen, wrote an op-ed acknowledging her ancestors' actions and supporting reparations and historical accountability. It sparked more debate. Every Christmas Day, a small group gathers at the marker: descendants, historians, activists. They hold a brief ceremony, leave flowers and carvings. They remember. Ruth's story is now part of conversations about slavery, resistance, and memory. It's taught in classrooms, discussed in book clubs, subject of papers and lectures. The fire she set burned not just wood and brick, but the illusion of order. It didn't end slavery, didn't bring Lily back, didn't destroy all records. But it left a mark that refuses to fade. It's a story about loss, rage, and impossible choices. About a mother who lost her child and decided if she couldn't have justice, she'd have retribution. About a man who valued profit over humanity and paid a price. But most of all, it's about resistance, about fighting back against overwhelming odds, refusing to be erased. Ruth couldn't save Lily, couldn't free herself, couldn't change the system. But she could light a fire. And she did. And that fire, in its own way, is still burning.